We are on page 267, the Old Testament book of 1 Kings. 1 Kings chapter 3. If you've ever heard the term the wisdom of Solomon, then that is where we're going to be looking at this morning. But really, wisdom is about discernment. And we're going to talk about how do you get to the truth in this age of outrage. Because if you notice, people just like to react. And if you go to one, I don't know if you're like me, I happen to be a news junkie, so I have to be careful because I will wind up watching and flipping across all different types of news channels, and I can go one perspective and get one station and get one type of news and the other another. But how do you know what the truth is? How do you get this discernment? So we're going to look at this. We're reading in 1 Kings chapter 3, beginning in verse 16. And then we're going to set the context of this during the message. Now, two prostitutes came to the king. In this case, the king is Solomon, and stood before him. One of them said, "Pardon me, my lord. This woman and I live in the same house, and I had a baby while she was there with me. The third day after my child was born, this woman also had a baby. We were alone. There was no one in the house but the two of us. During the night, this woman's son died because she lay on him. So she got up in the middle of the night and took my son from my side while I, your servant, was asleep. She put him by her breast and put her dead son by my breast. The next morning I got up to nurse my son, and he was dead. When I looked at him closely in the morning light, I saw that it wasn't the son that I had born." The other woman said, "No, the living one is my son, the dead one is yours." But the first one insisted, "No, the dead one is yours, the living one is mine." And so they argued before the king. The king says, "This one says, 'My son is alive and your son is dead,' while that one says, 'No, your son is dead and mine is alive.'" And the king said, "Bring me a sword." So they brought a sword for the king. He then gave an order, "Cut the living child in two and give half to the one and half to the other." The woman whose son was alive was deeply moved out of love for her son and said to the king, "Please, my lord, give her the living baby. Don't kill him." But the others said, "Neither I nor you shall have him. Cut him in two." And the king gave his ruling, "Give the living baby to the first woman. Do not kill him. She is his mother." When all Israel heard the verdict the king had given, they held the king in awe because they saw that he had wisdom from God, and then here's the word, to administer justice. Let's pray. God, as always, we pray that the words of my mouth and the meditations of our hearts would be acceptable in your sight. O God, our strength and our Redeemer. Amen. I have now been nicknamed the Emu Whisperer. Pretty impressive, huh? Kind of a nickname that, well, I think Pam agreed with, but I wound up giving myself. A couple of weeks ago, we went down to the Keys, and we went to a place called Robert Is Here. Anybody ever been to Robert Is Here in Homestead? It's a little fruit stand that's actually world famous. And people go in Homestead and they go to this place. And it's a cool place. So we were on our way down to Key West, and Pam said she wanted to stop. And so she went in the fruit stand and all that. And I said, "I'm going to go find a restroom." Well, the restrooms, it says, were out back. So I went out back, and they weren't really restrooms. They were sort of like the porta potty things. And so I found the one. And so as I walked out, there's like nobody around. I see there's like this, they have all these animals. There's like billy goats and there's emus. I go, "That's cool. There's an emu." Pam's inside. So I walked over, and I'm looking, and the emu's watching me. And I felt like we had sort of a connection. You ever felt like that with an animal? You've probably seen this play out on YouTube, right? So I had my hands on the rail, and I started talking to the emu, And he's looking at me, and he comes close, and I left my hands. I thought, you don't want to make any sudden moves because, you don't want to upset the animal, and you certainly don't want the animal attacking you. And you know how sometimes if a dog's coming around you and you don't want to make any sudden moves, and the dog kind of sniffs your hands and that, and then you could pet him. And so I just left my hand there. And the emu, he's getting closer, and he's getting closer, and I see his head duck, and I thought, oh, that's cool. I'm just going to leave my hand there. And he gets down, and he goes, bam, like that. I set a mark. I came back, and I was rubbing my hand, and Pam goes, what? She said I was white as a ghost, is what she said. I walked back in, and I'm holding my hand, and she said, What's the matter? I said, I just got pecked by an emu. She goes, what? Where's an emu at? She goes, I left you for 5 minutes and you got pecked by an emu? And I said, yeah, so that hence the emu whisperer. Now, I have to tell you what, I don't know anything about emus clearly because I wasn't very discerning at that moment. I thought it was going to be one way and it was a total another way altogether. You ever been in a situation like that where you thought things were going to go down one way and you read the situation entirely wrong? Happens all the time. I call it the word discernment. Discernment's an important word, and really, if you want to look at the true dictionary definition of discernment, it means the ability to judge well. The ability to judge well. And I would say to you that I think discernment is lacking more today than it has ever been because we have so much information coming at us so quickly. And so often what happens is we are lacking discernment in our decisions. So often we make decisions, and because we're making decisions so rapidly, we don't have time to get all of the information in, and suddenly we make a decision, and the decision is wrong because we've moved so rapidly and so quickly that we haven't judged well, and sometimes we look back on those decisions and we go, man, I wish I would have done that differently. Problem is that sometimes we don't learn from that, and we should. I don't know about you, but sometimes I got to repeat these things over and over until I finally learn it. It's better if we just learn from the experience, from the bad discernment the first time around. But I also think that we lack discernment in our discourse. Lewis actually referred to that being online, and because of what he's doing with the Miami Dolphins. I mumbled that. I didn't quite mean to do that, But when on Twitter, he could say one thing, and it's like people start attacking him on Twitter because of something. I mean, it's nasty. I was on Twitter last night, and I saw some woman said something, and another one said something else, and the next thing you know, they're going back and forth, and it's like a dumpster fire, man. You're watching it, and you realize that people are saying stuff on the keyboard because it's like, oh, they don't know me, and meanwhile, everybody can see it. Everybody can see it. In fact, the discernment that we lack today when we're making these decisions and doing dumb things, did you know that most everybody has a camera? You know what people do today when there's a fight? They don't break it up. They pick up their phone. That's the first thing I looked at after I got pecked by the emu. I looked around and went, cameras anywhere? I thought I was going to be a YouTube star, because that's the kind of stuff where you see it, where the animal, when animals attack, I'm going to be famous on TV because, and I'll be nicknamed the Emu Whisperer. Because we lack discernment in our decision-making process, and we lack discernment in our discourse. I've never seen, the discourse got really, really bad once social media kind of started. And you have to remember that when people say that the discourse wasn't as bad during President Obama's administration, and it actually was, people used to do things via email. And I remember the stuff that people would circulate via email, but they didn't do it as much on social media. And then you have now President Trump using Twitter and the journalists using Twitter, and so you can every morning, depending on what side you're on, you can find somebody that's going to agree or disagree with you. And the dumpster fire continues. And I look at some of these people sometimes and I'm thinking, you all are leaders of the greatest country in the world, and you're talking about one another like this. It is a lack of discernment. We have a lack of discernment in our leadership today. Lack of discernment in our discourse. Lack of discernment in our decisions. And everybody seems to get outraged very, very quickly. I feel sorry for the people that are in food service. The last thing you want is your coffee to be cold. You ever seen the YouTube things where somebody gets something wrong at McDonald's and they start throwing food and getting fights in the restaurants? I'm thinking to myself, really? We're outraged over a hamburger? How do you and I live with discernment in this age of outrage? I want to look at this story, but before we actually look at what we read, I want to read the background of what happened just prior to this, and you can go back up to the beginning of chapter 3, if you would like, and you can see 1 Kings chapter 3, if you want to go up to verse 1. And there's the story of how, Solomon comes in and becomes a king, and how he's making sacrifices, how he's followed David. And then to pick it up at verse 4, so the king went to Gibeon to offer sacrifices, for that was the most important high place. And Solomon offered 1,000 burnt offerings on the altar at Gibeon. The Lord appeared to Solomon during the night in a dream, and God said this to Solomon: ask for whatever you want, and I will give it to you. Wow. God says to Solomon, tell me what you want. You've pleased me even more than your father David. Now remember, Solomon was the son of David and Bathsheba. He says, Solomon, tell me what you want. Give it to you. Whatever it is. Could you imagine God saying that to you? What do you want? Just tell me. Whatever you want, I'll give it to you. Solomon answered, verse 6. You've shown great kindness to your servant, my father David. Yeah, he did. Because now notice what he says. He says he was faithful and righteous and upright. Notice what it says, upright in heart. I love that, because what that means is you can be upright in heart, and you can sometimes lack discernment and make the dumbest decisions around. Have you ever seen some really smart people and you think to yourself, why in the world did they do that? That's so dumb. Aren't they smarter than that? Their heart can be right, but sometimes we can lack discernment. So this is what he says about David. He says, you've continued this great kindness to him, given him a son to sit on his throne this very day. Now here it comes. Now, Lord my God, you've made your servant king in the place of my father David. But notice what he says. I am only a little child. Now he's exaggerating a little bit, because he's 20, roughly 20, when he's taking over the throne. But he realizes that he's young and he's inexperienced. And he says, I'm only a little child and do not know how to carry out my duties. I don't know that I can do this. I don't know that I'm going to do this the right way. And he says, your servant's here among the people you've chosen, a great people, too numerous to count. So give your servant a discerning heart to govern your people and to distinguish, listen to this, between right and wrong. For who is able to govern this great people of yours? The Lord was pleased that Solomon had asked for this. So he said to him, since you've asked for this, and not for long life or wealth for yourself, nor have you asked for the death of your enemies, but for discernment in administering justice, I will do what you've asked. I'll give you a wise and discerning heart, so that there will never have been anyone like you, nor will there ever be. Moreover, I will give you what you have not asked for both wealth and honor, so that in your lifetime you will have no equal among kings. And if you walk in obedience to me and keep my decrees and commands as David your father did, I will give you a long life. Then Solomon awoke and he realized it had been a dream. He returned to Jerusalem, stood before the ark of the Lord's covenant, and sacrificed burnt offerings and fellowship offerings. Then he gave a feast for all of his court. So here's the setting of what has happened. Solomon, born from an illicit relationship, decisions that his father David made that were totally wrong. But yet, if you notice, God is still talking about his respect for David, and that David really obeyed his commands, except in this one area, because David turned things around when the prophet came to him and said, no, you're the problem. You're the guy. And David admitted to his failure and his sin. And so now Solomon says, what God says to him, okay, listen, you've been faithful. Your dad was faithful on the throne, doing the right thing. He said, so here's what I want to say to you. You can ask me whatever you want and I'll give it to you. Now, notice what he says, the things that we normally would have asked for. Death of your enemies. Yeah, God, can you take out so-and-so? If they weren't in my life, I'd be better off. So, you start thinking about, who could I take out? Or how much money can I get? I would like another house. I would like another car. I struggled financially long enough, so maybe you could give me that. Maybe it's a job or a spouse or this or that. Because you think about, if God came to you with unfettered and said, ask whatever you want, what would you ask for? I don't know that at my age I would even be smart enough to say, God, I want to be smarter. I want to be a better leader. I want to be more discerning. There's a lot of other things that would come to mind before that. But he asks for wisdom. And God says, you know what? I'm going to give you everything else because of that. So here's one day. We don't know whether it was at the feast because he's given this feast. And it says right after that, now 2 prostitutes. Did you catch that? 2 prostitutes who lived in the same house. So we don't know whether it was a brothel type thing. We have no idea. We have no idea whether there was a man that also lived there, whether it was the same father for both of these children. But they lived in the same house, probably in the same room across from one another, because we looked at we talked about houses even back in this time and what they were made of and their size and all of that. And so this woman comes to King Solomon. And she says to him, pardon me, my lord. This woman and I live in the same house, and I had the baby while she was there with me. The 3rd day after my child was born, she had a baby. We were alone. There was no one in the house but 2 of us. Now, so that you know what this means? That they helped each other deliver these children because there was nobody in the house. So we don't know who else was there, but especially when they're sleeping, there's nobody there. They're together. So what she's basically saying is, listen, king, it's going to be my word against hers. You know what the scriptures constantly talk about, where something has to be proven? It has to be proven in front of 2 or 3 witnesses. There need to be at least 2 to 3 witnesses to a crime that occurred, but there wasn't. It was now her word against her word. It was, you did this, no, you did that. And now they've brought this mess to the king. It almost sounds like, at first, a little bit of a reality show. It's a very sad situation, but you look at it and think, what the world? So she says the 3rd day that she had the baby, and that during the night this woman's son died because she laid on him. That's horrible. She was probably nursing the child, fell asleep, rolled over on top of him, and killed the child. That was it. It's horrible. And you know that we have things called sudden infant death syndrome today. Not what it used to be, but we've heard of these kinds of situations. Okay? So she laid on him. So what does she do? This is so absolutely conniving. Could you imagine this? It says she gets up in the middle of the night. She takes the son from her side because she was sleeping quietly. She grabs her. She switches kids. We've heard stories from years ago. It doesn't happen as easily now as it used to. But you hear about somebody bringing the wrong child home, and then they get a DNA test, and they find out, you're not my mama, you're not my dad. And so she's trying to switch this off. Now, I'm not a mother, but mothers are instinctive by nature. And so mama immediately knew there was something wrong. Just imagine this. Imagine that you're a mother, that you're in the room. You don't have a private room. You have given birth, and the woman next to you has given birth. Your child dies in the middle of the night, but because maybe they both have dark hair or the same complexion or whatever, literally, she switches babies. That's awful. But no one would be the wiser. Now, they couldn't do DNA tests. It was her word against the other. So she took my son from my side while I, your servant, was asleep. She put him by her breast and put her dead son by my breast. The next morning, I got up to nurse my son, and he was dead. But notice, when I looked at him closely in the morning light, I saw that it wasn't the son I had born. The other woman said, no, the living one is my son, the dead one is yours. I mean, emphatic. You ever seen somebody tell a lie emphatically? No, that's not true. You're wrong. And so now the first one insisted, no, the dead one is yours, the living one is mine. And so they argued before the king. Can you imagine this? It says they argued is probably putting it mildly. They're going back and forth right in front of King Solomon, arguing about whose child it is. And no, my child was alive, and you took my child that was alive, and you took it for your own, and you put your dead child next to me, and you tried to switch this. And this is they're arguing back and forth and back and forth. And the king's like, he's 20. And he's watching these two women argue. And there's no one to prove this. No way to prove who's right and who's wrong. He says, this one says, my son is alive and your son is dead. While that one says, no, your son is dead and mine is alive. And the king, it doesn't say that he paused, but I believe that he did for a moment, because he's, by virtue of the fact that he's saying, yeah, you're saying one thing, she's saying another. It's kind of like, who's telling the truth? I have an idea. Bring me a sword. I'm sure the people around him thinking, okay, Solomon's definitely not his father David, because they're thinking he's going to kill somebody. If he's bringing a sword, something bad is going to happen. This situation with a dead child has just gone from bad to worse. What is the king doing? So he literally has them go get a sword. So just imagine the scene. Here's the women standing before the king, arguing. You say this, you say that. And then he looks at one of his servants and says, hey, go get me a sword. I'm sure his advisors are like, what's he want a sword for? The women are probably like, what's he want a sword for? They come in with a sword. And he said, you there. Here's what I want you to do. They're going to have to bury a baby anyway. So the idea is they're going to bury two of them. And since they're both saying this is their child, one is not going to deserve to live, certainly, because I can't make the decision. So both should die. And what we'll do is we'll cut the child in half. Half will go to one lady, half will go to the other. They each will be able to mourn, and they'll each be able to do their thing here. What kind of an answer is that? But remember what I said about a mom? A mom who's in her right mind will literally give her life for her child. Give her life for her child. And she would gladly let her child live, even if it was with someone else, as long as the child lived. And that's how the story ends. The woman whose son was alive, deeply moved out of what? Love for her son, said to the king, please, my lord, give her the living baby. Don't kill him. Meanwhile, here's whoever she is over here. No. Cut him in two. Cut him in two. A mom is not going to say that. The biological mother of that child. And the king gave his ruling. Give the living baby to the first woman. Don't kill him. She's his mother. Woo. He somehow knew deep down that mom, real mom, was going to sacrifice whatever time she would have with that baby so that that baby would live because she gave birth to that baby. And suddenly at that moment, he said, all right, stop. Give the baby to her. It's really hers. And then it says, what happened after that? All Israel heard the verdict the king had given. They held the king in awe because they saw that he had wisdom from God to do what? To administer justice. That is an outrageous thing that occurred. And I can't imagine being the person that is in front of me with two people, and I've been in some weird situations, but with two mothers arguing and nobody else to prove it, and I'm the one that's going to make the decision to say, take the child, he's yours. And how do you know what the right thing to do? Because what an outrageous thing for someone to do. For their baby to die and to switch the dead baby with a live baby and claim the live baby as their own. It's outrageous. But that's what she did. And it took an incredible amount of discernment, of being able to judge well for Solomon to make the correct decision. Folks, we are confronted every single day with decisions. They're not as serious as this. but outrageous things that happen in front of us, and how we respond to those things are often going to make an extraordinary difference in the lives of others. How we respond in our discourse to others, how we respond in the decisions that we make. We often need, as I said, the wisdom of Solomon and the patience of Job. We're not talking about the patience of Job next week, but we are talking about the wisdom of Solomon. How do we know, how do we make the correct, discerning decisions in this day and age? How do you know when you're reading something in the news what's true and what's false? I don't like somebody from the news telling me, well, that's fake news, or our news is truth and that one's false. Everybody's going to claim to have the truth. Everybody tells truth from their perspective. As a matter of fact, today you'll hear a lot of people will just say, well, that's how I feel, so that's how it is. No, truth is truth. In other words, in this case, this child, it wasn't how one felt. Truth was truth. One gave birth to this kid. So how do you discern the truth? There's a couple of things that I think are really, really important to live with discernment in this age of outrage. And there's a couple of principles that we pull out of the story. And the reason why I read the setting, the first one is this: humility. Did you see that? Solomon, at 20 years old, often, man, when we are younger, we are 90 feet tall and bulletproof. We know everything. Usually it's not till we get older that we realize we know nothing. And maybe even a little less than nothing. Though I feel like the older I get, the dumber I get in certain areas. It's like, what in the world? I thought I knew this. But here's a guy that's 20 years old that has the opportunity to take anything he wants from the God of the universe. And God didn't put any conditions on it. And he said, I am humble enough. He didn't say I'm humble, but we look at it, and he's humble enough to say to God, I can't do this job without you. I am not equipped. I am not my father David. I don't know what to do. I am young. I don't have the experience. I don't want to make the wrong decisions. So he's humble enough to say, listen, I need help. Humility is a tricky thing, isn't it? You know, the moment that you think that you're finally humble, you're not anymore. You ever think about that? I love when somebody says, well, I'm humble. No, not anymore, because you just said that you were humble. You know, humility is one of those strange things. Humility means simply that I'm going to ask for help. That I know what I know and I know what I don't know. And I think the older that I get, that's when I say, I know what I know. There's certain areas that somebody's not going to argue with me in. Certain theology areas and certain things about communication don't argue with me unless you've done a lot more than I have in that area. But there's a lot of areas like math. You know, listen, folks, I'm just going to tell you, I don't like math. When they always did the word problems, Charles was traveling 20 miles north on the train and the other one did this. And I'm thinking, and I would ask questions like, well, why do you take the train and not, why do you take the train? You could have taken the plane. That wasn't the point of the story. You're supposed to add it. But I'm not good at math. But I'm smart enough to know what I don't know. We have got to, in this age, be humble enough to admit that we don't know. We jump at every discourse. We try to make every decision. We don't ask for help from God or anybody else. But as old as I am, there are more times that I ask people's advice on certain decisions. There are people that I go to to talk to about preschool stuff. I have friends that were in the preschool business that ran up to 50 preschools. If I have a question, I call them. I know what I don't know. Now, I'm not saying I'm humble. I'm just saying that we have to look at what Solomon did. And Solomon said, listen, God, I can't do this. And if we're really going to have discernment, we've got to be humble enough to say, I can't do this alone. I've got to have input from God and input from others that he brings around us. There's a second thing. I believe Solomon had what we like to call empathy. Empathy is a big thing that everybody's talking about today. But empathy means that I get over into your shoes and try to look at things from your perspective. You ever notice that we don't do that when we're having a discussion? Especially online. I want to get my point out. I want to show people how clever I am, how snarky I can be, how quick I can be, how smart I can be. I want to show them that I know more politically and theologically and everything else than they do. But Solomon literally sat there and listened to these two women without making any prejudgment. He probably could have come in and said, great. So I mean, I'm thinking, okay, so they're two women of the night and they're arguing about this kid? Really? He didn't make any decisions like that. He had no preconceived notions when they walked in. He didn't judge them based on what their lifestyle was. He didn't judge them based on anything. And he truly sat there and listened to them. And he goes, this one's saying this one's saying that. I don't know what to do here. And then finally, he took action. Folks, more than ever before, we have got to listen closely. It's more important than ever. As quickly as information is coming at us, as quickly as people are saying stuff, we literally have to pause, step back, and then step into their shoes a little bit and try to look at things from their perspective. Because I can tell you that, as we've said so often, everybody has a story. Everybody's coming at things from a perspective. And when you finally get behind and try to understand their perspective, you understand why they're making the decisions that they're making and why they're doing what they're doing. So I believe that Solomon also had that empathy. But there's a third thing that's probably just as important or more important than these two. I'm going to use the word context. Everybody's talking today about how communication is king and all these. You know what's really king? Context. Everything has context. Every story has context. Solomon was able to take and look at the context of what was happening here, and all of a sudden he stepped back, looked at the big picture perspective, because yes, he had two prostitutes in front of him. Yes, he had two women that were arguing. Yes, he had these two women that were going back and forth and trying to figure this out. And all of a sudden he looked at this within the context of all things motherhood. And he thought to himself, wait a minute. The real mother is not going to let her child die. Just like that. In this age of outrage, we've got to get context and perspective. And for us as that call ourselves followers of Jesus, it's even more important, because it's easy for us to get human and to react. It's easy for us to want to bite back and to be snarky back and to want to fight back. It's easy for us to try to make quick decisions because maybe somebody's demanding it or society's demanding it and all of that. And we really need to step back, get the help that we need, make sure that we are looking at things from not just our perspective, but other people's perspective, and how is what I'm going to do impact them, and also after all that, let that determine the context that we need. And then we'll be better at making that decision. We'll be a little bit better and a little wiser to hopefully make the right decision that will not only impact others, but could impact the world. Let's pray.